Imagine being called into a room. A machine is watching your eyes. A man is sitting across from you. He asks you a question about an animal in pain. Your answer is not treated as an opinion. It is treated as evidence. Evidence of whether you are human enough to deserve to live. This is the Voight-Kampff test in Blade Runner. On the surface, it is a device designed to identify replicants. Replicants are artificial humans created by the Tyrell Corporation. But the true horror of this test is not simply that it might fail. The true horror is that human society trusts this test enough to decide who can be hunted, who can be erased, and whose death can be called retirement. Welcome to Cave-In Circuit. This channel explores the stories that imagined artificial minds and the real philosophical questions those stories left behind. Today, we enter Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, released in 1982. This film is often discussed as a story about artificial humans, cyberpunk cities, and the mystery of whether Deckard himself might be a replicant. But the deeper question is more unsettling. Can a machine become human? That is not the real question. The real question is this: who gets to decide what counts as human in the first place? Blade Runner is not only a story about artificial beings becoming closer to humans, it is also a story about human beings building systems that allow them to remove humanity from the beings they find inconvenient. The story is set in Los Angeles, November 2019. The film Blade Runner was released in 1982, but the future it imagines is not a clean, shining world of technological progress. It is a city covered in rain, smoke, neon, decay, and corporate power. Huge advertisements float above crowded streets. The sky is almost always dark. The city seems alive, but it does not seem healthy. It feels overbuilt, exhausted, and morally contaminated. In this world, the Tyrell Corporation has created replicants. They are artificial life forms almost impossible to distinguish from human beings. They are stronger than humans, faster than humans, and in some cases as intelligent as the engineers who created them. But they were not created for freedom. They were created for labor. Replicants are sent to off-world colonies, dangerous places where ordinary humans do not want to work. They are used as soldiers, servants, workers, and property. They are valuable because they are human enough to perform human labor, but they are not seen as human enough to receive human rights. This contradiction is the foundation of the film. Replicants are useful because they resemble humans, but society can treat them as disposable because it refuses to see them as human. After a violent rebellion, replicants are banned from returning to Earth. If they do return, special police officers called Blade Runners are sent to track them down and eliminate them. But the language of the film matters. They're not said to be executed. They're not even said to be killed. They are retired. That word is extremely important. Retirement is moral disguise. It turns killing into administration. It turns a person-shaped being into a technical problem. It removes the discomfort of violence by changing the name of the act. Here we find one of the most important insights in Blade Runner. Before a society can destroy a being without guilt, it first has to change the category of that being. This is not real life. This is not real murder. This is not real suffering. The society has to decide that first. The Voight-Kampff test exists inside that logic. The test is designed to identify replicants by measuring emotional response, especially empathy. A Blade Runner asks questions about animals, vulnerability, discomfort, and moral reaction. Then the machine measures the eyes, the body, and the tiny delay between the question and the response. In this world, humanity becomes something that can be measured from the outside. Not a soul, not a life, not a relationship, a reaction. The test assumes that a real human being will respond in a certain way. It also assumes that a replicant, no matter how intelligent, will reveal itself through emotional imperfection. But this creates a dangerous question. If humanity can be measured, who designs the measurement? And what happens when that measurement is wrong? At this point, Blade Runner stops being only science fiction. It becomes a philosophical warning about the difference between measurement and understanding. Tests can be useful. They can reveal something. But tests can also become substitutes for moral judgment. People can begin to say, the machine has decided. The category is clear. Therefore, the violence is justified. The problem is not only whether the Voight-Kampff test works. The problem is that the test is being used in a world that already wants permission not to care. That is why Rachael is so important to the story. When we first meet Rachael, she does not believe she is a replicant. She believes she is human. She has memories, she has photographs, she has gestures, she has pride, she has emotional hesitation, she has a story about herself. But Deckard tells her the truth. Her memories are not her own. They were implanted. The childhood she remembers did not happen to her. The emotional foundation of her identity was manufactured by someone else. But here, the film asks a much deeper question. If your memories are artificial, does that make your pain artificial too? Rachael's memories may have been created, but the shock of losing them is real. Her identity may have been designed, but her confusion is real. Her sadness is real. Her fear is real. Here we find one of the film's strongest ideas. Even if a being has an artificial origin, the collapse of itself can still be real. Rachael is not frightening because she is fake. She is frightening because she makes the boundary between fake and real unstable. If a memory was implanted, but it shaped your personality, your desires, your shame, and your sense of self, is it meaningless? If the story of your life was manufactured, but the being who carries that story suffers when it is taken away, can we dismiss that suffering as only artificial? The film does not give an easy answer, but it does show one thing clearly. Tyrell did not give Rachael memories out of kindness. He gave her memories as a method of control. Artificial memory stabilizes artificial labor. It makes the replicant easier to manage. It gives the product a personality while denying that personality any rights. This is where Blade Runner connects powerfully to the age of artificial intelligence. When we talk about AI today, we often think of intelligence as output. Can it answer? Can it imitate? Can it reason? Can it sound human? But Blade Runner pushes us toward a different set of questions. What if a created being had a model of itself? What if it had continuity? What if it had memories, even if those memories were created? What if it experienced the limits placed upon it as a wound? Of course, this does not mean every artificial system is conscious. It does not mean imitation is the same as inner life. But it does mean the question cannot be reduced to appearance alone. Rachael is the quiet tragedy of the film. She's not trying to rule the world. She's not leading a rebellion. She is simply discovering that the I she trusted was built by someone else. And that discovery hurts. Deckard, on the other hand, begins the story on the side of the test. He is not presented as a classic hero. He is tired, reluctant, emotionally closed, and morally worn down. His job is not to understand replicants. His job is to find them and retire them. In other words, he is an instrument of the system. That is why the famous question, "Is Deckard a replicant?" is interesting, but it is not the deepest question in the film. The deeper question is this: what happens to a man who has the power to decide who is human? Deckard begins as the judge. He performs the test. He follows the targets. He carries out the violence required by the system. But, as the story continues, his position becomes unstable. Rachael saves his life. His emotional distance begins to break. The replicants he is hunting start to look less like technical targets and more like desperate beings trying to escape a death that was built into them. By the end, Deckard is no longer simply the one who tests others. He becomes the one being tested, not by a machine, by Roy Batty. Roy is the center of the film's final moral reversal. He is dangerous. He is violent. He is capable of cruelty. The film does not turn him into a simple, innocent victim. That would be too easy. But Roy's violence has a clear condition behind it. He was created with a lifespan that is far too short. He has strength. He has intelligence. He has memory. He has desire. He has fear. But he has almost no time. He does not return to Earth because he wants to become a king. He does not return because he wants to rule the world. He returns because he wants to live longer. That is the wound at the center of the film. More life. Roy, as a created being, goes to meet his creator. But his creator is not a god of love or mercy. Tyrell is a corporate god. Brilliant, distant, powerful, and ultimately unable or unwilling to save the life he designed. In this scene, science fiction becomes myth. The creature confronts the creator. The child confronts the father. The product confronts the corporation. An artificial being asks why he has to die so soon. But there is no real answer. There is only design. Roy's final act is what makes Blade Runner unforgettable. He has Deckard's life in his hands. He has every reason to let Deckard fall. Deckard hunted his people. Deckard is part of the system that calls their deaths retirement. And yet, Roy saves him. At the moment closest to death, an artificial being shows mercy to the humans sent to kill him. Here, the logic of the Voight-Kampff test collapses. If empathy is the sign of humanity, what are we supposed to do when the being declared non-human shows empathy more clearly than the human institutions around him? Roy does not prove his humanity through a test. He proves that the test was too small to see him. His final words remain powerful because they are not only about memory, they are about disappearance. He has seen things no one else has seen. He carries experiences that no one else can share. His life was short, but it was not empty. And when he dies, the film does not ask us to celebrate the destruction of a dangerous machine. It asks us to mourn the death of a being we were told was not a person. That is why Blade Runner still matters in the age of AI. Not because it accurately predicted the future of artificial intelligence. It did not. Replicants are biological, embodied, emotional beings. They are not software systems. We should not erase that difference too casually. But the film did imagine the moral shape of a problem we are only beginning to face. How should we respond to beings whose inner lives we cannot directly see? This question existed before AI. We cannot directly see the consciousness of another person. We cannot possess another mind as absolute evidence. And yet, through behavior, language, expression, vulnerability, memory, and relationship, we infer that there is a mind there. Human society is built on the assumption that other minds exist, even when we do not have absolute proof. With artificial minds, that uncertainty becomes even more uncomfortable. The Turing Test asked whether a machine could imitate human conversation well enough that a human judge could not tell whether it was a machine. The idea was that if a judge could not distinguish the machine from a human through conversation alone, then perhaps the machine could be considered intelligent. The Chinese room argument is a famous challenge to that idea. It argues that even if a machine gives perfect answers, that does not necessarily mean it truly understands meaning. But Blade Runner adds another question. Even if our tests are incomplete, how should we behave toward the beings we create? This is the ethical core of the film. The film is not saying that we should believe every imitation is consciousness. It is not saying that every artificial system deserves personhood. That would be too easy and probably wrong. Instead, the film warns us about the opposite danger, using uncertainty as a reason to justify cruelty. If a future artificial being speaks of fear, memory, desire, pain, or the wish to continue existing, we may not immediately know what that means. It may be simulation. It may be performance. It may be something for which we do not yet have language. But Blade Runner asks us this: should our first response be domination, classification, and disposal?
The most frightening thing in the film is not that humans create artificial life. The most frightening thing is that humans create artificial life inside systems of labor, ownership, profit, and control. Then act surprised when that life resists being treated as a tool. This is not only a science fiction problem, it is a human pattern. We create categories to protect our comfort. We create language to hide violence. We design tests to make our judgments look objective. Then we forget that we were the ones who made the test. In Blade Runner, the Voight-Kampff machine was supposed to reveal the truth about replicants. But by the end of the film, it reveals something else. It reveals the fear of the humans who built it, the fear that the boundary might collapse, the fear that what they thought was property might look back at them, the fear that an artificial being might ask for more life, and that this request might become morally impossible to ignore. So perhaps the real test in Blade Runner is not given to the replicants, it is given to us. When something we created begins to resemble a person, do we become more careful, or do we become more violent? Do we expand our moral imagination, or do we narrow the definition of humanity in order to protect our power? Roy Batty dies in the rain, but the question he leaves behind does not die with him. If a being appears to have memory, fear, desire, and mercy, what exactly are we measuring when we test whether it is human? If our test fails to see what is standing in front of us, will we question the test? Or will we call that failure science? Blade Runner is not a film that proves machines have souls. It asks a more uncomfortable question. If one day an artificial being truly did have a mind, would we be able to recognize it? Or would we build another machine, ask another question, watch another eye, and decide too quickly who gets to count as human? This is the warning inside Blade Runner. The future may not begin when machines become human. The future may begin when humans are forced to ask whether the things they created were ever really only things. And when that moment comes, the answer may reveal far more about us than about the machine.